diys-by-dar. This was a group membership project with Made by Marley, a faux majolica tile top table using DOS air dry clay and the 4 mistakes that I made. Here was my project table, a small little end table that was super duper glossy on the top. So I'm guessing that it was Formica, and I am going to have to take and sand this down before I even do anything on that tabletop. So I used some 120 grit sandpaper and my surf prep outside because I don't think that this probably would be very good to breathe this stuff in. I worked on that tabletop and you could definitely see just that top coat coming off, just a powdered white. Once I got that cleaned up, I went ahead and I got my Dixie Belle Slick Stick, which is my favorite bonding primer, and gave this table 2 coats on the top and all over the rest of the table as well. I have my DOS clay, some Loctite, and some rolling pins. Take your clay and condition it. Get a nice flat pancake, and I'm shooting for probably 1/8 of an inch. And my first mistake was this glue. This glue was so thick I could hardly get it out of the tube. It was like spreading frozen Vaseline. I should have just used quick and thick. It would have worked a lot better. So that was my first mistake. Set that clay on top of your glue, and you're going to take your rolling pin and roll it out flat in all directions. And then I think that was my second mistake, was I did not roll it enough out to get that clay just a little bit thinner, because I did have some cracking occur along the way. Moving the table probably didn't help. It was flexing a bit, so that probably cracked it. So I'm just spreading out some more of that really thick glue, and we are just going to add on to our clay base and get it next to each other, roll it out, and then mend your seams together by melding them 2 clays together. The other problem with this glue, I'm thinking that it may have had a reaction with this wet clay, because I was getting a lot of bubbles underneath it, and sometimes some quite big ones. So that tells me there was some type of chemical reaction going on there. Just if you get bubbles, just poke them with something sharp and work them out, and then smooth your clay down. I have everything on. When you come to the outside corners, you're going to just either trim it off or add some clay in, roll it out again, try to get it as flat as you can, and let this clay dry. It's probably going to take about a week. When it is white, then you know it's dry. We need to make our faux lines, our grout lines, and I just used a sanding rib to get in there and make them a little bit bigger. How I got my lines even, I took and found the center point on each side of the table, and I wanted 6-inch tiles. So I went 3 inches out from that center point and then took a yardstick and just lined them up across the table and pressed it down in there to give my initial line. And then I went back with that rubber rib and just wiggled it back and forth to make that grout line just a little bit bigger and a little more realistic looking. Nice and dry, nice and white. I still didn't like how smooth it was, so back outside, some 220 and the surf prep, and I sanded it down. Here is our nice white palette we are going to be working on. I used 2 silk paints. That was mistake number 3, Wharf and Oyster. Wharf was going to be my faux grout lines, so I went and hand painted all of those in. Oyster was going to be each individual tile, and I did have to put 2 coats on. And you can see that that grout line's a little bit bigger on the ends. So here is my lovely rooster, and this is where the silk paint, I believe, caused a problem for me, because silk paint has a top coat in it. So I'm trying to put this paint on something that already has a top coat, so it was a little bit smeary. You will see my frustration in a moment here. After repainting and fixing everything up, I went to Posca pens, painted in a little yellow beak in his eye, and went around the outside of the rooster with the red, and also made some striations in his feathers. I also did take a gold Posca pen and add a little bit more detail in his feathers. Here I started with stencils, and I just used the Posca pens. I was not going to risk all that smearing on top of the table again. I had a bit more control, so things went a little bit smoother. I always added a little bit of brown into each tile to pull it back to the rooster. There are those 2 sides now that have a little bit of nothing on it, so I needed to put something on it. And I found a stencil that had just a little bit of a design that went with it, and I added that design on both sides. I wanted to add some character to the legs, so I taped it off, and I was going to put a red stripe with rustic red. And also I got the IOD crackle stamp and used some IOD color in stone gray and added that all in. Plus the tiles were cracking in a couple areas, so I needed to do it to pull it together. There are my legs, and I added some red on the feet as well. Now I have it all taped off with some paper going around the whole table, covering the feet, and I set it on a garbage bag so I could catch all that excess that may drip off. And this was the type that I use, Jan Chun. It's a 2-part epoxy, equal amounts of liquid. Once you get it in your cup, you mix it up for 3 minutes and then you pour it. This was mistake number 4. It kept telling me warm room, warm liquid. This is running like water. I have never poured a epoxy table before, so I had no knowledge that this was too watery. I really had a bad case of the runs. I tried the brush, forget that. I just used my hand and smoothed it all out so every area was covered with the epoxy. I had 0 bubbles with this type. But for the next hour, when I kept checking it, it was dripping and dripping and dripping off of the edge down onto the floor. And I had to keep clearing that off, wiping it off so I didn't get hard drips. Houston, we have a problem. Over the whole top. So, I'm going to mix up another batch and we're going to do it again. Here's what I had on the ends. You can see how it all separated and just dripped off. So this time my room temperature was just what it was, 66. Poured equal amounts from A, from B. Then when I went ahead and poured it in my larger cup, I was real careful to tip that and let it kind of run down the side so I wouldn't make excess bubbles. Stir it in one direction for 3 minutes, and then you are ready to pour that epoxy. And I could already tell it was much thicker. It was staying where I laid it down. So I was very hopeful that I could save this table at this point. It did set up a lot quicker. I still had to watch the ends for dripping of very minute bubbles. But remember that table that I started with? And this is what I ended up with. diys-by-dar. I want to thank you guys for hanging with me and watching this video. I learned a lot. I want you to please like and subscribe, and I will catch you on the next one.